Hello everyone and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. Well, today we're going to continue our Wings adventure and see what happens after Paul goes home from Japan. After the Japan fiasco, Paul probably didn't feel like facing his bandmates because they were a bit upset with the money they lost when the tour ended. So at this time, McCartney II is made. In the spring of 1980, the album was released 10 years after Paul's first solo album, McCartney, appeared. Well, I bet Paul liked going into his creative world and making music all by himself. It was a distraction and a source of comfort, and Linda did a few backing vocals. Paul put aside any thoughts of the band having some friction by saying, "There's nothing against Wings in this," Paul stated. "Everyone's got a lot of solo stuff. Denny's got one album, Lawrence's got one, and I've got one, and sometime we'll just pick it all up again." Well, the McCartney II album was a disappointment for the critics. They felt that the lyrics were throwaways, and they felt that the melodies weren't up to par either. But one great thing that came from the album was the song Coming Up, and that song was and is so addictive that when you hear it, the song gets stuck in your head. Okay, they made a video of this song which had Paul dressed up as various characters and him playing all the instruments, and some characters were Frank Zappa and then Beatle Paul. And the neat thing is he called the band the Plastic Macs, a nod to John Lennon's Plastic Ono band, I'm sure. In March and April of 1980, John Lennon decided to reside at a home that he had in Canyon Hills Estate on the edge of Long Island's Cold Spring Harbor. The Lennons had purchased the property from the previous autumn, and John had been eager to spend more time there. He had his personal assistant and driver, Fred Seaman, with him, and he just enjoyed riding along the North Shore roads in order to check out the new neighborhood. So John let his assistant drive, and he would scan the radio listening to songs and rarely finishing them. And then he'd go down memory lane on certain songs, and he didn't like hearing Beatles songs on the radio because he remembered the recording sessions and wished that they had done some things differently. And one afternoon, according to Salon.com, Lennon heard a familiar voice crackling over the car radio. "F.A. Pig, it's Paul," he exclaimed. John felt much of what Paul did was bubblegum music, but this song he couldn't get out of his mind. And this song inspired John to get his creative juices flowing again, so thank you, Paul, for that. Well, at this time, the band, as Paul had said, were doing their own thing. Denny Lane and the drummer Steve Holley went on the road with JoJo Lane, Andy Richards of the Alex Harvey Band, and Mike Pigott. And then they did shows on the weekends throughout the summer in Britain. It was just like they were doing a game plan of how Wings started in 1972. The guitarist Lawrence Juber, he went solo. He decided to go to the United States to find inspiration on some songs he was doing. And he did an album of guitar versions of standard songs. And Linda, she took up doing photography again. She had an animator, Oscar Grill, to make an animated film of her song, Seaside Woman. And the film was entered in a short film category at the 1980 Cannes Film Festival, and it won the Palme d'Or prize in May, according to the book Band on the Run. So Paul, he kept on his own music path. In July, he flew to France to help contribute to Ringo Starr's album Stop and Smell the Roses. Paul wrote the song Private Property and Attention. And Lawrence, he provided guitar on the cuts, and Linda did background vocals. So then Paul and Wings go back to the studio. In the fall of 1980, enough time had passed, and the group got back in the studio to create a new album. And the album was going to include post-1970 McCartney outtakes and unreleased songs. But it was this time that was the last recording session for the group, and the album was never released legally. Paul ended up creating the album Tug of War as an individual, not as a member of the group Wings. And it was at this time that Paul learned about John Lennon's death. And Paul was in London working on an album. And Paul, according to Paddy Maloney, he was the leader of the Chieftains, an Irish band, said that Paul looked stunned, and Maloney had gone to the studio to help on the album that day. And Paul said to him, "It was tragic and useless, and it didn't make any sense." It sounded like Paul was in a state of shock, just as the world was at the time. It was way worse for Paul because of all the years he was friends with John, and they were together in the band so long. But the press was quick to swarm him, wanting a statement, and Paul could only muster, "It's a drag." It looked like Paul didn't care, but that wasn't the case. He mourned his friend in private. And it was at this time Paul and his family were getting death threats. Paul hired security guards, and he made up his mind he didn't want to tour anymore. The group beside Linda wanted to continue to tour, so John Lennon's death in a roundabout way kind of dissolved the band. But it seemed like it was starting to head in that direction, especially after Japan. Okay, next up, George Harrison created a single all those years ago. In early 1981, Denny, Paul, and Linda sang backup vocals on George Harrison's tribute to John Lennon all those years ago. It brought the Beatles back together in a way because Ringo Starr did the drumming on the song. I'm sure the song would have pleased John because years ago he was mad at George for not writing more than a sentence about him in his book, I Me Mine. He told Playboy that I was hurt by George's book. He did a book out privately on his life that by glaring omission says that my influence on his life was absolutely zilch and nil. And he said that George remembered every 2-bit sax player or guitarist he ever met in subsequent years, and he wasn't in the book. So while everyone was there at the Harrison estate creating the song, the feeling was kind of uncomfortable, according to Denny Lane. He felt that Paul felt superior to George, and after Paul and Linda left, the atmosphere lightened up. It could have had something to do with Paul being a perfectionist, but according to Denny, Paul doesn't trust people, and it shows. Well, it sounds like at this time Denny was still a bit miffed at Paul. Before, he would take up for Paul whenever band members were out of sorts, and now he started to make digs at him. So when the song was released, it was in the spring, and it went to the top of the charts worldwide. I've always loved the song and the tribute it made to John, and Denny said that he was never paid for that session. Okay, as I was thinking, there seemed like there was some kind of problem going on between Denny and Paul, and in the book Band on the Run, Paul had gone to Montserrat on February to work on a Wings album, and Paul was feeling nervous, and he had hired security guards because he was getting death threats, and that's why he didn't want to tour. And then Paul and Denny were having problems. He wasn't happy about the pay he had been getting in the past 10 years. He didn't like how his wife JoJo was treated in the past. If she showed up in the studio, Paul would say, I can't work with people around. So Denny thought that Linda was jealous of JoJo because JoJo was extroverted and Linda was more of an introvert. And things couldn't get resolved, so Denny left the island and the group. Denny said it was the incident in Japan that made him decide to leave. According to the book Band on the Run, Denny said, we'd been waiting for 5 years to get there. And then one reason is the fact we couldn't do the tour, and that was the biggest upset of all. And Denny felt that Paul and Linda were careless with their drug use. He said he had witnessed them smuggling the drugs, putting it one time in the hood of Stella's coat and baby James's diaper where it couldn't be found. So you can hardly blame Denny for feeling angry about it. They took a chance by trying to sneak the drug in, and it cost them their tour and the money the band would have made from it. Wings began when Linda suggested Paul create his own band after the Beatles broke up. Paul started from the ground and made his way up, and this proved that Paul wasn't a one-hit wonder, being known only as a Beatle. He was successful as a Wings member too. And this isn't the final video of Wings. Tune in again, and we'll see what happened to the other members of Wings and how they felt about the group's breakup. I hope everyone's enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, that would be great. And don't forget to hit the notification bell if you haven't already, and you'll be notified when a new video is coming up. Well, I hope everybody's been having a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of The Beatles Forever. Thank you. Bye.